I've always been interested in community theater and done community theater, different parts and directing and that sort of thing over the years. But it's always kind of been a goal of mine to try to do a one-man show. And I was fortunate, I ran into a friend who looked at me one day and said, "You look an awful lot like Ulysses S. Grant." So I looked around to see if anybody had been doing anything, and although there are Ulysses S. Grant reenactors around the country, nobody's really done a dramatic program about him. And so that was my goal, and I hope that that's what people are going to take away from today. It's more of a performance and a dramatic program than any type of a narrative about his life. So that's what got me started. I was fortunate to be selected by Humanities Iowa to be a presenter, and as a consequence, I've been able to present it many, many times all over the state of Iowa and different states. I think today's performance will be about 135, right in there. But I've been doing it for 10 years, so I better have that many racked up.
I rise, but only to say that I do not intend to say anything. I thank you for your warm welcome and your great good cheer. Thank you. I just recited for you a speech I've given many times in my life. I find that if I say it with just the right amount of enthusiasm, people will begin to clap and cheer, and I may leave the stage without ever having to say another word.
The first thing is to treat Ulysses S. Grant and treat everybody else that has been a president as a human being. We have a tendency to think of historic figures as people that are made of marble. They don't have emotions, they don't have feelings, they don't have disappointments. All we think about are their successes. And Ulysses S. Grant had as many problems as just about anybody you could ever find. I'm telling the story when he's 63 years old and dying of cancer, for goodness sake. So he had a life as a human being that had nothing to do with marble busts and had nothing to do with being honored for who he necessarily was. The main two ideas I'd like people to take away from the show are, I'd like people to think about the Mexican War with a different bit of criticism in their mind. That's something that was skipped over in high school history classes. Just a quick mention of the Mexican War. And Ulysses S. Grant was, although he fought in the war, was a critic of the war and a critic of how the United States got involved in the war. And so I think it's important that what people take away from the show, that they do a new analysis of what the Mexican War was all about. The other thing is Reconstruction. Again, when I was a kid in school, Reconstruction was, you learned the word carpetbaggers, you learned the word scallywags, and then on to the races. You forgot about anything else. And Reconstruction was the core of what Grant tried to be about. Reconstruction was ultimately defeated, and frankly, the newly freed slaves of the South were just essentially re-enslaved by the racists and the Klansmen and the white leaguers and the white liners of the South. And that's something that I think people should take a look at. That's something that people need to think about. And so I hope people take that away from the show.
You want to find out about Ulysses Simpson Grant. Now think of that name for just a moment. Isn't that a regal name, Ulysses? And it turns out that many, 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 many years ago, there was a poet named Homer, and Homer wrote a couple of books which featured a man named Ulysses who was the king of one of the Greek city-states. And when the Greek city-states determined it was appropriate for them to go to war against Troy, the Greek city-states selected this Ulysses as the leader of their army. And after a hard-fought war, this Ulysses, this same Ulysses who had been a king and was still a king and was the general of the armies and remained the general of the armies, he attempted to go home. and he got on his ship and promptly got lost and traveled all around the then known world in the Mediterranean Sea until he finally got home. Now think of that for just a moment. How prescient of my parents to name me Ulysses S. Grant. For just like Ulysses of old, I was the leader of a great country. And just like Ulysses of old, I was the leader of a victorious and wonderful army. And just like Ulysses of old, I went on a trip around the world. Mine was voluntary. But how wonderful of my parents to do that. And it's a great story. And it would be an even better story if it was only true. Because when I was born on April 27, 1822 in Point Pleasant, Ohio, I was not named Ulysses Simpson Grant.
Normally, I do the shows in libraries like this in Spencer, and normally in the state of Iowa. But I've been fortunate to do it other places. I started out, the original presentation was at the Iowa Veterans Home in Marshalltown. I've done it at historical museums in Des Moines and in St. Paul. I've done it in a museum in Wisconsin. I've done it in at Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis, Missouri, which was one of the places that Grant was actually stationed at. I've done it in Colorado, done it in Arizona, done it in South Dakota, and I've enjoyed all of them. So I've been around with Ulysses S. Grant and have really enjoyed both doing the show and the audience reaction afterwards. I've been very, very gratified with how people approach the show and treat the show.
Now, St. Louis, Missouri was the home of a fellow named Frederick Dent. And Fred Dent was a classmate of mine and a roommate of mine at the United States Military Academy. And so, of course, as soon as I was stationed there, I made it a point to go to visit the Dent farm and visit the Dent family. And when I arrived, I found that Fred was not the only attraction in that family, but that there was a younger sister whose name was Julia Dent. And so I had the great joy and pleasure of meeting Miss Julia Dent. And we chatted a bit. And then I had to go back to the Jefferson Barracks, but later that week I found another occasion to drive right out to the Dent farm, and again I was able to meet with and chat a bit with Miss Julia. And, well, the joke around the barracks after a while was that when I went out there, I didn't have to guide the horse because the horse knew the way on its own, and that's because Miss Julia and I had fallen in love. And oh, did we make plans. Oh, we made plans. But then those plans were interrupted by war. Now, we are not the first, and unfortunately we will not be the last young couple whose plans are interrupted by war.
Humanities Iowa is a statewide organization that tries to support and fund humanities programs throughout the state. And it is a mechanism to try to allow places that otherwise would not have an opportunity to go to one of the larger cities in the state to see an offering in the humanities, whether it's an art show, whether it's a lecture about history, any number of things. Humanities Iowa has been very good about supporting people in the arts, and I was fortunate I got recommended to it by a former member, a fellow who was a wildlife photographer who does a show for Humanities Iowa, and he happened to be at one of my shows, recommended me, and so I was selected.
So those two, Floyd and Pillow, and a man named Nathan Bedford Forrest. They scuttled away in the middle of the night. The next morning, Simon Bolivar Buckner got his officers together, and they looked out, and we were still there. We were still there. And he knew the only thing he could do was surrender the fort. Today is February 17th, 1885, is that right? Yesterday, February 16th, 1862, that was when the Battle of Fort Donelson was won. So you do the math, you'll know how long ago it was that this next set of events occurred. You see, Simon Bolivar Buckner looked out on the field and saw that we were unbeatable and that the only option he had was to surrender the fort. So he sat down and he wrote a note to me as the commander of the federal forces. Now I have a copy of the note here, and I will tell you that there will be a copy of this note on onion skin paper. It'll be very official looking. I've been assured that when my book is published, so this is an incentive to get a copy of my book, in addition to all other incentives. But you need to know that this is what he said. He said, "Sir, in consideration of all the circumstances governing the present situation of affairs at this station, I propose to the commanding officer of the federal forces the appointment of commissioners to agree upon terms of capitulation of the forces and fort under my command. And in that view, I suggest an armistice until 12 o'clock today." To which I replied, "Sir, yours of this date proposing armistice and appointment of commissioners to settle terms of surrender is just now received. No terms except an unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted. I propose to move in immediately upon your works." To which I received this reply, "Sir, the distribution of forces under my command incident to an unexpected change of commanders yesterday, and the overwhelming force under your command compel me, notwithstanding the brilliant success of Confederate arms yesterday, to accept the ungenerous and unchivalrous terms which you propose." So, Fort Donelson and some 17,000 rebel soldiers surrendered to this ungenerous and unchivalrous fellow you see standing in front of them. And that's when they started calling me the Unconditional Surrender Grant.
I have a website, but it has one of those really complicated addresses on it. So just put the words Pete Grady, Ulysses S. Grant in the Google search engine, and I will be the one that pops up. On that website, my email address, my home phone number is there, and there's also a video of a performance that I did right after the beginning of COVID, when we did a show just to try to raise money for the Marshalltown Community Theater on a closed set with no audience. And folks that want to see a video of the performance can see that there.